My husband Camille apologized to me in such a Philippines manner, saying he got his mistress pregnant and we needed to break up. I was dumbfounded, and my affection for him ran out 6 months ago. Is the mistress someone I know? I asked. Yeah, it's Kyra. Remember meeting her again at Alice's wedding reception. Since then, my husband seemed completely unashamed. Alice's wedding was the year before last, so you've been cheating for over a year. Alice was a college classmate, and Kyra was a junior 2 years behind me. She was in the same research group as Alice, and we played tennis together in college, so I remember her well. She was nicknamed Little Devil behind her back and was quite famous in a way. Huh. Oh, is that so? Time flies when you get older. My husband just laughed it off. What on earth was he thinking? I can't understand him at all. I'm Viola, 30 years old. I met my husband in the college tennis club despite him being 5 years older at 35. He often showed up as an alumnus who loved happy hours, had lots of friends, and was friendly with everyone. He took great care of freshmen and was kind, but I later realized it was limited to girls after we started dating. I cried many times due to his cheating habits back then, but I loved him and married him right after graduation. But once I started working, I got to know the real him, or rather, his useless side. He frequently appeared in the tennis club's clubhouse, acting all high and mighty with the juniors because he was completely ignored by his peers. The truth was he was so incompetent at his job that he wasn't given any serious responsibilities. Even now, there's no prospect of a raise or promotion. He's just a pretentious good-for-nothing who can't do his job or household chores. I tried various things to change him after we got married, but his refusal to change made me give up. The reason I had to divorce him wasn't just that work was busy and it was a hassle, but also because his parents were good people, a reason that had nothing to do with my husband himself. So look, we need to split up quickly because of the baby coming. You can have this apartment, and I'll leave. That's the end of it, okay? I was taken aback by his careless words and my husband's sly grin. What? No way. Let's part ways cleanly. This is not a good opportunity. As I neared my 40s, I started wanting a child. I had graduated college and started working as a full-time employee. I found myself in a situation where I was earning more than my husband, and my company offered excellent parental and maternity leave benefits. I was ready to start a family, but despite our efforts, it just wasn't happening, and it broke my heart. The love I once felt for my husband had dwindled away, especially after discovering his affair and the news that he got the other woman pregnant. I was determined to cleanly and completely end the relationship. What infuriated me even more was his lack of remorse. Instead of apologizing, he simply voiced his needs and demands. It was evident that it was time to put an end to this unpleasant relationship that had dragged on for years. We would involve a lawyer, ask for compensation, and divide our property. And of course, we would expect something from Kyra as well. However, when I voiced my concerns about the financial aspect, my husband callously suggested that I take on the debt myself since it was his affair that caused the separation. When I glared at him, he relented, admitting that he might need his father's help to cover the expenses. I proceeded with the divorce proceedings and hired a lawyer. Despite multiple calls from my in-laws pleading with me to reconsider, I remained steadfast in my decision. Even my father-in-law broke down in tears, acknowledging that if I left, it would spell the end for him. My mother-in-law begged me to reconsider, expressing her love for me like her own daughter. But even they understood once I laid bare the truth about my husband's constant infidelity and laziness. Finally, they apologized profusely, hanging their heads in shame. They even paid the compensation in a lump sum on behalf of my husband, who had no savings of his own. They made him promise never to ask for their help again and to repay them promptly. I still can't fathom how such a careless and irresponsible man could come from parents as decent and responsible as his. I decided to retreat to my parents' house. The divorce proceedings, which I had anticipated as a hassle, wrapped up faster than I expected. Returning to my recently relocated family home, 6 months flew by. I found myself consumed by work on weekdays and occupied with household chores on weekends, leaving little room to dwell on my ex-husband. Then, out of the blue, my best friend Alice called, seething with anger from the moment she started speaking. Viola, did you know your ex-husband Camille and Kyra? They're living it up in a new high-rise apartment, flaunting their wealth everywhere. Kyra even had the audacity to invite me to her baby shower party. The presents alone cost over $100, and there's a $100 participation fee. It's outrageous, isn't it? She exclaimed. I was taken aback by the news. I hadn't realized that Kyra had given birth, let alone why she would reach out to Alice. Both my ex-husband and Kyra were well aware that Alice was my best friend. Why would Kyra even extend an invitation to her, knowing Alice would undoubtedly relay everything to me? When I tentatively mentioned this to Alice, her anger escalated even further. She did it deliberately, Viola. Deliberately. That awful woman had the nerve to tell me she's so happy now, thanks to Viola breaking up with Camille. Can you believe her audacity? She's the worst kind of person. I want to put her in her place somehow. Alice raged. That nickname from our college days resurfaced in my mind. Kara was always known as the little devil, stirring up trouble among seemingly happy couples. Even when relationships were strained because of her involvement, she remained composed, wearing a facade of innocence. If a couple splits up just because someone else shows interest, it wasn't true love to begin with, right? They would have broken up eventually anyway, so what's the harm? She'd say, her words dripping with sugary sweetness, all the while smirking knowingly. I felt a pang of pity for Kyra, realizing she might never have experienced genuine love. Despite this, I knew better than to involve myself with her, so I made the conscious decision to keep my distance, at least for the time being. Kara didn't matter much to me. There was something else that demanded my attention. Alice. There's only one newly constructed high-rise apartment building, right? Have you heard anything about them moving in? I asked Alice, seeking any information she might have. I've never met them, Alice quickly replied, but apparently it was very recent. They'd been boasting about securing a spot. Fortunately, someone who had bought one of the units had to relocate for work and put it back on the market without moving in. Ah, that makes sense, I nodded, processing the information. So, your moving day is Sunday, right? The baby shower party is on Saturday. You'll only need to be cautious for one day. There are multiple elevators, and they might use different entrances. You're right, we haven't crossed paths so far, so it should be fine. Alice concurred. We live together, but unexpected situations can still arise. As fate would have it, an unexpected situation did indeed unfold on Saturday. While waiting for the elevator on the first floor, I found myself face to face with my ex-husband and Kyra as they stepped out of the elevator. Hey, Viola, what are you doing here? My ex-husband spoke first, with Kyra chiming in. Viola, are you here to celebrate with us? You must be eager to see our adorable baby, aren't you? Kyra's voice was cheerful, her smile radiant, but her eyes betrayed a different story. They held no hint of amusement. What? Seriously, did you come to crash the party without an invitation? My ex-husband interjected, his tone incredulous. To scope out the high-rise apartment or catch a glimpse of our little prince. The casual reference to the baby as both baby and prince grated on my nerves. That's not it, I retorted coolly. I was just waiting for the elevator. I responded, consciously switching to a polite tone midway through the conversation. Camille was now my ex, essentially a stranger, and I didn't want to create a scene. Ha, so you're planning to visit my house after all? Camille remarked with a hint of amusement. You're so silly, Viola. Stop being stubborn. Perhaps you're just envious of our luxurious high-rise apartment and our adorable little prince. Do you still harbor feelings for me? Are you feeling lonely and longing to see me again? Camille, that's not acceptable, I interjected firmly. Regardless of any lingering emotions you think I may have, you're now married to Kyra. It's inappropriate for me to barge into your home uninvited. And as for jealousy, Kyra, you're mistaken, but I appreciate your concern. Camille continued, dismissing my words. Sorry, Viola, but Kyra and our son are our top priorities now. You're not welcome here. As I listened to their conversation, I couldn't help but feel perplexed. It had been 6 months since I last saw my ex-husband, and yet his mindset remained as irrational as ever. Kara's attitude was equally baffling. It dawned on me that my cheating ex-husband and his new partner were a perfect match in their own peculiar way. Reflecting on it, I regretted wasting my precious 20s on Camille. I'm utterly ashamed of my past with Camille, wishing to bury those memories deep in darkness. If only I had ended things sooner without making excuses, I wouldn't have to endure this nonsense from my ex-husband and his partner. My words seemed to strike a nerve with Camille, who retorted, What's that? You're really lacking charm. Learn from Kyra. Even her jealousy is endearing. She's just given birth, yet she still takes the effort to look stylish for me. Don't you find her admirable? Not at all embarrassed. I replied calmly. I was simply going to the grocery store. I was dressed in a plain white t-shirt and jeans, clean and presentable. That's the problem. I grew tired of your simplicity. Camille snapped. Enough already. We have nothing to do with each other. Just go home. Annoyed by his dismissive tone, I retorted, actually, this is my home. Seeing their disbelief, I had to explain. I've been living with my parents in this high-rise apartment for 6 months now. My father was approached by salespeople when talks of selling the land he owns arose. They suggested that living in a high-rise would be more convenient, especially as he's getting older. While it's not entirely our land, we received a substantial sum from selling it. During negotiations, we were able to move into one of the higher floors for much less than market value. Camille was taken aback. You're landowners with that much money. If I had known, I wouldn't have agreed to the divorce. Give me back the compensation money. There's no need for a property settlement, I replied firmly. The compensation was a result of your affair, and the property settlement was a matter between us as a married couple. As I spoke, I noticed Kyra mumbling to herself, her silence speaking volumes. I caught it. I can't believe Viola is living in a high-rise. I thought I had totally won, Kyra exclaimed, shooting me a glare. But Viola, you don't have a baby or a loving partner, do you? I haven't lost yet. Look, Kyra, I was never competing with you, I replied calmly. In fact, I'm thankful to you for giving me the opportunity to break up with Camille. Oh, and I'm moving out of my house tomorrow, so I don't think we'll see each other again. What? Why? You just moved into a high-rise, they both exclaimed in surprise. I shrugged, explaining, maybe it's a matter of different values. It just wasn't a good fit for my family. I found living in a high-rise unsuitable for hanging laundry outside. There are no balconies on the higher floors for safety, and only some windows can be opened. It wasn't suitable for my mother and me, who preferred drying laundry and bedding in natural sunlight and wind without using a dryer. Plus, the intense sunlight made it too hot, even with the air conditioning on. The building also shakes quite a bit during even a magnitude 3 earthquake. It's designed to sway to prevent collapse, and the higher floors shake more. It was terrifying. Most stressful of all was the daily elevator ride. It gets crowded during the morning commute, and it takes time since it stops on each floor. The advertised 3-minute walk from the station felt much longer in the elevator. We were too bothered by the drawbacks unique to high-rise living, so we decided to move to a regular house with a garden. After all, luckily, our apartment sold quickly at almost the same price we bought it for. As I finished explaining, both my ex-husband and Kyra grinned. Oh, so we'll never see each other again. So, a high-rise wasn't suitable for commoners like you. It's more suited for an elite celebrity family like mine, Kyra remarked sarcastically. I couldn't comprehend how he arrived at that conclusion, but one thing became abundantly clear. What I grew to despise and ultimately gave up on was that facet of you, pretentiousness without substance, an unwillingness to change or exert any effort. I reached my breaking point with you, but it's all right now. You're beyond repair, so goodbye, I repeated, echoing my ex-husband's own words back to him. Stepping into the just-arrived elevator, I glanced at Kyra, who was glaring at both my astonished ex-husband and me. Right before the doors closed, I added one final remark. By the way, are you sure the child is truly yours? My ex-husband looked utterly perplexed, prompting me to clarify. I mean exactly what I said, right, Kyra? You understand what I'm implying, don't you? As the doors closed, I didn't know what transpired next in reality. However, during our struggle to conceive, I underwent tests at the gynecologist, which revealed no issues on my end. I began to suspect the problem might lie with my husband, but he adamantly refused to get tested. Hence, I delivered the incendiary parting shot. Later, I heard from a mutual friend who attended Kyra's baby shower. Despite boasting about their high-rise lifestyle, my ex-husband and Kyra were residing on the 3rd floor. Additionally, despite their extravagant demands for gifts and participation fees, only cheap snacks from the grocery store were served. When a friend voiced a soft complaint, Kyra reportedly exploded, demanding gratitude for the chance to see her baby up close and insisting on payment. This sparked a heated argument between my ex-husband and Kyra, leaving their gathering in disarray. Thanks in part to my earlier cryptic remark, it was revealed that my ex-husband and Kyra had moved into a high-rise but were struggling financially, attempting to swindle money from their friends through fabricated reasons. Their deceit caused outrage among their friends, who promptly left. Meanwhile, my family and I settled into a single-family home with a garden where I recently welcomed an adorable kitten. Our former high-rise was embroiled in controversy due to significant defects and illegal construction methods, making it unsellable. Reflecting on our situation, we realized we were unexpectedly fortunate. Now, I find solace in my severed ties with my ex-husband and cherish the tranquility of my peaceful days. As I hang the laundry on a sunny afternoon, my kitten sometimes curls up on the clothes, its adorable sleeping face bringing me a sense of contentment. Today, like many others, was a good day.
Considering your father-in-law was a director at a major company, I'm curious about how much inheritance he might have left behind, John inquired, trying to mask his curiosity. I sighed internally but maintained a cheerful smile. I heard it's $54,000, I replied. John looked shocked. My name is Catherine. John and I have been married for 20 years and our son left for college this year. Life with just the two of us is quiet but manageable. On weekends, John joins his colleagues for football and practices all day. I work part-time and spend my days off gardening or attending yoga with my friends. Even though we do different things, I think we're a typical couple for our age. However, something terrible disrupted our peaceful life as a couple. It started with a message I received from a friend who attends yoga with me. Attached to the message was a photo. I'm at the station now, but isn't this your husband, Catherine? I hesitated, but when I opened the photo, even from a distance, I could clearly tell it was John. He was walking hand in hand with another woman. My heart pounded. Could John be cheating? He said he was going for football practice in preparation for tomorrow's match, but was that a lie? I think it's my husband, I replied. My friend responded immediately, what will you do? Do you want to come over? After a moment of hesitation, I replied, no, I'm good. I'll talk to my husband. I closed the phone and sat down on the sofa. I had no motivation to do anything, and the only thought in my head was, what should I do? I could ask John, but I was afraid. What if he really was cheating? Thinking of divorce, especially when I only have a part-time job to support myself, made me think that I couldn't possibly go through all that. If I pretended not to know, I could continue living a peaceful life like before, but the idea of pretending and the ambiguity bothered me deeply. I don't know how long I sat like that, but I was jolted back to reality by the sound of the front door. It was already 7 in the evening. What's wrong? Why haven't you turned on the lights? John asked, surprised, as he turned on the living room lights. Oh, sorry, I fell asleep, I said. John laughed in disbelief and began washing his uniform in the washing machine. Seeing that, I realized he must have been exercising and wondered if the earlier photo might have been a mistake. If you're tired, do you want to eat out tonight? John suggested. I nodded eagerly, hoping that spending time together would help ease my uneasy feelings. Did you stop by anywhere else today besides football? I asked. Not really. Why? He responded. Just wondering. You mentioned wanting new shoes recently, so I thought you might have gone shopping for them. Oh, I haven't bought them yet, he said. With that, our conversation ended. The John in front of me seemed just like how he has always been. They say everyone has at least 3 doppelgangers in the world. Perhaps the man in the photo was one of them. However, once I began to suspect him, it was difficult for me to stop. I often found myself dumping him during his late-night overtimes or sudden overnight business trips. Bad things do happen. One day, on my way home from my part-time job, I stopped by the supermarket to buy ingredients for dinner. My phone rang, and I took it out of my bag, stepping into a less crowded aisle. The name displayed on the screen made me frown. It was my brother's name. Though I occasionally communicated with my sister-in-law during events like our children's school enrollments or graduations, I hadn't spoken to my brother in years. These sudden phone calls from relatives are often not good news. Hello, I answered hesitantly. I answered the call. What I heard from my brother was distressing. Our father's health was worsening. He had suddenly collapsed at work and had been rushed to the hospital. After some detailed exams, the doctors informed him that our father didn't have much time left. My mother had passed away from an illness a few years ago, and although my brother and his wife had offered to live with our father afterward, he had refused and continued to live alone, seemingly in good health. The last time I spoke to him, he sounded fine, so this news was truly surprising. After telling my brother I would visit soon, I hung up the phone and took a deep breath to calm my heart. When I told John, who came home from work that night, he looked really sad. I see, your father. Don't worry about things here. You should go see him, John said. Encouraged by his words, I went to see my father the next day. Dad, what happened? Are you okay? I asked. Oh, Catherine, I suddenly felt dizzy and couldn't get up. It must be old age, I guess. Sorry for making you worry, he said. His usually loud and boisterous voice sounded weak, causing pain in my heart. Though he looked pale, he didn't seem critically ill. "Catherine, did something happen? Did you and John have a fight?" he asked suddenly. Taken aback by his question, I didn't know how to respond. My father gave a wry smile. "You're just like your mother, holding things in. Live as your heart desires." Not knowing what the future holds, for a parent, seeing their child's smiling face is the greatest happiness. Realizing the truth in his words, I was deeply moved. Although I wanted to talk to my father a little longer, he told me he was tired, so I decided to leave for the day. The visit lasted only about 15 minutes, but just thinking that he could be so exhausted from such a short time made tears roll down my cheeks. As I sat on the sofa near my father's room, waiting for my tears to stop, a man in a white coat sat next to me. "Are you here to visit your father? I'm the doctor in charge." "Oh, I'm so sorry. How embarrassing," I said, quickly taking out a handkerchief to wipe away my tears. Taking a closer look at the doctor, he seemed to be around my age with a kind face that made me feel at ease. "It's all right. It must have been a shock for you. Do you have any questions?" he asked. With his encouragement, I started to ask various questions about my father's condition and what to expect in the future. Despite repeating the same questions multiple times, he never looked annoyed and explained everything in detail until a nurse came, saying, "Sir, we need you." Thanks to him, even though I still felt sad, my heart was somewhat at ease. After returning home and recalling my conversation with my father, I decided to call the friend who had sent me the photo. I wanted to discuss the suspicions I had about my husband's affair. "I've been worried I might have done something unnecessary by telling you that. I'm sorry for causing you pain," my friend said. "No, I'm glad you told me. I've finally come to terms with John's suspected affair, but I have no idea what to do," I confessed. Chuckling, my friend shared some advice. "Actually, my husband is a lawyer. He said there are many clients consulting him about divorces due to affairs. I'll ask him for advice." Hearing this, I felt comforted knowing I wasn't the only one struggling. My friend immediately took action, telling me it was best to gather evidence of the affair and that I could use a private detective agency to do so. She even recommended a few agencies and offered to go with me if I felt anxious, making me realize how invaluable true friends are. From then on, between visiting my father and working part-time, my days were quite busy. At the same time, my husband started saying he was getting busier with work. Overtime and business trips noticeably increased, and his suspicious behavior had me eagerly awaiting the investigation results. 2 weeks later, I finally received the awaited results at the detective agency. The investigator hesitated before speaking. "It's true that he's having an affair." Surprisingly, I accepted the reality without panicking or feeling devastated. In fact, knowing the truth brought a sense of relief, dispelling my previous uneasiness. They showed me numerous photos and explained his activities over the past 2 weeks. There were also audio recordings, and the situation was worse than I had imagined. To begin with, his football games were only once a week, always in the morning for just 2 hours. The other employees always headed home right after the game, as they had families waiting. However, John spent all his remaining time with his mistress. At times, she would even wait for him at a diner near the football court. He deliberately washed his jersey, claiming he used it during the game, to ensure his lie wasn't caught. All his claims of overtime and business trips were fabricated just to spend time with her. The most shocking audio recording revealed him discussing with his mistress about getting a divorce once he inherited his money, predicting my father's passing in a month or so. They had already discussed pre-booking an apartment near the train station. His recent busyness was related to preparing for their new life together, making reservations for furniture and appliances, and even planning a premarital trip next month. All this left me feeling dizzy. The fact that my husband was eagerly waiting for my father to pass away destroyed any remaining love or affection I had for him. My only feeling was the increasing desire to divorce him. I paid a significant amount to the detective agency, took all the data, and decided to leave it with my friend for safekeeping. When I mentioned hiring a lawyer, they immediately agreed and offered to introduce me to someone they knew. However, I had used all my money on the detective agency and was hesitant to touch our shared finances. After some contemplation, I decided to swallow my pride and consult my brother about it. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he exclaimed, annoyed. Thankfully, he generously offered to cover the expected legal fees. I had a meeting with a lawyer and discussed my desire to work full-time or as a regular employee at my part-time job. I was told they could hire me as a contract employee, which gave me hope regarding my financial situation. With everything now in place, I started thinking about how to broach the subject of divorce. One midnight, I received a call from my brother. He was calling to tell me that our father had passed away. I woke up John, and we rushed to the hospital. John briefly visited my father, greeted my brother and his wife, and said some comforting words to me. He then returned home by himself. Everything after that happened so quickly that I can hardly remember. There was the wake, the funeral, meeting our relatives, and basically, I had no time to grieve. Even after the funeral, there was the matter of sorting out the house, discussing inheritance, and handling the legal aspects of my father's estate. My brother, his wife, and I were all exhausted. John, however, kept saying he was busy with work and didn't help at all. Despite my father having just passed away, John went out to play football on the weekend. My brother and his wife were visibly frustrated, but they knew about my intention to divorce him and refrained from saying anything. With so much going on, I had to postpone the divorce. It wasn't until about 6 months later that things took a major turn. Finally, all procedures related to my father were completed, and the inheritance amount was confirmed. By the way, has your father's inheritance come through yet? John asked. It's scheduled to be transferred tomorrow. Why do you ask? I replied. Well, your father was a director of a major company. I was just curious about how much inheritance he'd leave behind. John tried to sound casual. I sighed internally but hid my true feelings and just smiled brightly. I heard it's about $54,000. That much? He exclaimed. Yes, Dad must have worked hard to save that much. I just got a call today from the lawyer saying everything's ready. It'll be transferred tomorrow, so maybe we can go out and eat something delicious to celebrate, I said, emphasizing the fact that it would be transferred the next day. John seemed lost in thought. The next day after John had gone to work, I conspicuously placed the bank book on the desk. When I returned from work, as expected, the bank book was gone, and instead, a signed divorce paper was there. I hadn't anticipated things to go this smoothly, so while thinking he took the bait, I headed to my lawyer handling my divorce and explained the current situation. I decided not to return home, instead heading straight to my family home where my father had passed away. Most of my belongings were already there, and the things where I lived with John were shared, and how to handle them would be decided later. Probably John and his mistress would end up living there. Having already submitted the divorce papers, there was no reason to contact my estranged husband. The only thing left was a potential claim for damages for his affair from my lawyer. However, since they couldn't contact him, nothing could be done at the moment. But 3 days after I returned to my family home, I received a call from John. Catherine, what's going on? There's no money in the bank account. Where's the inheritance and where are you? John demanded. Inheritance is mine. Why would you use it? I decided to play dumb for the time being. By asking about my whereabouts, it seemed John had returned to our home. I needed to contact my lawyer immediately. Anyway, why isn't the $54,000 in your bank account? Did you take my bank account? John asked. I was planning to change the account for my salary deposit, but it disappeared. I've been looking for it. Don't mess with me. We're married. It's a shared asset. You should share it with me. I wished he wouldn't yell over the phone. It hurt my ears. The inheritance is an individual asset, not a shared one. Plus, I've already filed for divorce. We're no longer a married couple. Please stop contacting me. I won't return home. It's okay for you to live there with your mistress. I could hear John catching his breath, but I hung up and immediately relayed his whereabouts to the law firm. That night, I received several calls from John, but I ignored them all and enjoyed a drink by myself. Having endured the suspicions of his affair for almost a year, I deeply appreciated the peacefulness I was experiencing. After a good night's sleep, I checked my phone and was shocked at the sheer volume of missed calls. I assumed my lawyer must have contacted him, causing him to panic. Hesitantly checking the messages, some were aggressive, like, "What do you mean by damages for the affair? If you knew, you should have said so." Others were apologetic. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I want to talk things over." Without replying, I left my phone behind and headed to work. In my bag was a new phone with a number John wouldn't know. This would be my main phone from now on. I had John's personality figured out, so I was well prepared. Later, my lawyer informed me that John insisted on discussing this face-to-face, so I decided it was time for a confrontation. I expected this and felt it was better to settle matters swiftly. I chose a family restaurant with semi-private booths for our discussion to avoid any public attention. As expected, John and his mistress arrived on time. Seeing John after months, he looked somewhat tired. Was it just my imagination? I had seen photos of his mistress, but it was my first time seeing her in person. She had her hair up in a bun and wore casual clothes. Her youthful face made me think she was a student, but I knew from my investigation that she was 25 and worked at a cake shop. I couldn't comprehend what such a cute girl saw in a 50-year-old man. "Catherine, what's going on?" "There's no inheritance, and now there's a claim for damages. I'm completely lost," John said, bewildered. Both my lawyer and I couldn't help but chuckle at his words. "The inheritance is what my father left for me, John. You have no right to it. As for the damages, it's because our divorce is due to your affair. You both owe compensation for the pain you caused me, I explained. It's not about the affair, it's due to our incompatible personalities. Besides, it wasn't you who brought up the divorce, I did. So the affair doesn't matter, John retorted. Hearing such nonsense made me want to pull my hair out. I knew he wasn't the brightest, but I didn't expect him to lack basic common sense to this extent. The one at fault can't initiate the divorce. It's not about who brings it up first. It's about you having an affair. If that's true, you understand that you're in the wrong, right? Also, I'll be demanding compensation from her too. What? Why me? Despite her cute appearance, the mistress sounded very defiant and sharp. Is that true? John looked at the lawyer as if clinging to hope. Unfortunately, it is true, the lawyer confirmed. You said I'd be getting money. I wasn't told I'd have to pay. I'm going home, and since I'm divorcing you, this has nothing to do with me, she shouted, grabbing her bag and storming out of the restaurant. It was embarrassing as other customers turned to look at our table. We know where she works, so it'll be fine, the lawyer said with a reassuring smile, causing John's face to go pale. Perhaps he realized he couldn't escape. You know, that girl is quite headstrong. She used to be a good girl when we were having an affair. She was always smiling around me and would cry, saying she'd miss me when it was time for me to leave. John rambled. Even though he was talking about their affair, I didn't know how to react. After we started living together, her cooking wasn't great, and she constantly wanted new bags or clothes. It was cute at first, but being married to her was not what I expected. Even though they'd only been remarried for about a month, complaints about her started pouring out of John's mouth. I've realized something. I've always been comparing her to you, Catherine. You're skilled at housework, great at cooking, and you always waited for me to come home without a single complaint. So would you consider giving us another chance? I was left in disbelief, unable to keep my mouth shut. I never anticipated this turn of events, and even the lawyer seemed too stunned to speak. There's no way. Come on, I'll change. I promise I'll never cheat again, John pleaded. You cheated on me while using the excuse of being busy at work, didn't you? How can I believe anything you say? I countered. John lowered his head, repeating, I want to start over. You said you were busy with work when my father was dying. He was in critical condition for about a month, but you never visited him even once. Even though I was having a difficult time, you were cheating. After he passed away, were you just waiting for the inheritance? I noticed our drawer being opened several times where we kept our bank book. You probably planned to leave once the inheritance came in, right? With the divorce papers already filled out? As I listed each fact, John began to tremble. He probably never thought he'd get caught. You had a reservation to buy a nice apartment already, right? But unfortunately, since you didn't get the inheritance, you had to cancel. I assume the old house we lived in must have been unbearable for her, I continued. How do you know? John asked, his voice shaking. I have plenty of evidence. Are you thinking that if we get remarried, you won't have to pay the compensation? With that, John fell silent. I must have struck a nerve. Realizing he was only after my money made me feel sad and disappointed. If there's nothing more to discuss, I'm leaving, I said, standing up. Wait, John grabbed my arm as I tried to leave. Catherine, you're the most important thing to me. Please, I beg you, let's start over. John's eyes were filled with tears. I'll never betray you again, and I'll do all the chores. Please come back to me. Unable to contain his emotions, John began to sob uncontrollably. Come on, don't make a scene. Aren't you and your mistress newlywed? Why don't you two sort things out? Let's just move on with our separate lives. Turns out she's been cheating on me. She seems to have married me for my money. Without money, I'm just an old man. Seeing my ex-husband crumbling to the floor, crying, was undeniably pathetic, but I felt no obligation to comfort him. People had heard our conversation, and it was painfully embarrassing to witness everyone whispering about John. Leaving my crying ex-husband behind, I picked up the bill, and my lawyer and I left. Later, as the two of them adamantly refused to pay compensation, I consulted with John's parents over the phone. Having had little interaction with my rather shy in-laws who lived far away, this was my first call to them since thanking them for attending my father's funeral. To my surprise, I discovered John hadn't told his parents about our divorce or his remarriage to his mistress. This revelation left his parents in shock, with my ex-mother-in-law becoming bedridden from the strain. Give us some time, we're not sure what to do, was their unsure response, making it clear I couldn't rely on them. However, the next day, my father-in-law brought his brother to confront John. His brother, compared to John, was a lively, talkative, and cheerful man. John had often grumbled to me about how intimidating he was during family gatherings. Whatever transpired, his strong-willed brother made John agree to the compensation payment. Then his brother decided John would be taken back to the countryside. Tearfully, my father-in-law informed me of this decision. Since both in-laws were over 80 and had no income, they promised John would work at a factory owned by a relative nearby and pay me the compensation. As for John's mistress, her whereabouts were unknown, but since her workplace was known, they contacted her there. She shouted, "Don't contact my workplace." However, I spoke with a woman claiming to be the manager and was informed of an astonishing fact. It seems that the person John was referring to when he said, "She's cheating on me," was the husband of the store manager, and she was apparently preparing to sue them. I was assured that John's mistress would never escape justice, and true to that word, a few months later, I received the compensation payment. When I visited the cake shop to express my gratitude as expected, the mistress was nowhere in sight. Naturally, she was fired from the cake shop. She had dreams of becoming a pastry chef, but that's now believed to be impossible. Currently, to repay the compensation, she's juggling multiple jobs, and according to the store manager, she can often be seen at a nearby construction site. Out of sheer curiosity, I took a glance and noticed her without makeup, sweaty, and being yelled at by an older man while she worked. Having to pay compensation for the two affairs she had, she must be heaply in debt. I'm not sure how many years it'll take her to repay it, but she got karma for destroying someone's family. When I told my son about the divorce, he was genuinely surprised but said something along the lines of, "It's your life, you should live it as you see fit," which was a relief. My biggest concern had always been how my son would react, and with me approaching 50, I thought there'd be no chance for love or even remarriage. But lately, there's someone I've been interested in. He's the doctor who took care of my father in his final moments. Every time I visited the hospital, we'd end up chatting, and I found him to be very nice and wonderful. After the divorce, during one of my solo trips to the shopping mall, we bumped into each other, and in our conversation, I discovered that he was also divorced. We connected even more over our similar experiences. We've been out for meals a couple of times, and I always feel very comfortable around him. I don't know what the future holds, but I still hope and strive